everyone. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Rachel Swinson, and I am a member of the Cormier Honors College here at Longwood University. For Dr. Batula's English 483 class, I had to complete an honors enhancement project in order to fulfill my honors requirements for this year. What Dr. Batula and I decided on was a guidebook for us pre-service and future first-year teachers on how to differentiate your writing lessons to accommodate the needs of your English language learners in your future classroom. I put a lot of time and research into this paper, and I hope you guys will benefit from it as much as I did. The title of my guidebook is Teaching Writing to English Language Learners, a beginning teacher's guide to understanding differentiation techniques for ELL students. Dr. Petula should have uploaded a copy of my paper for you guys to look at, but I have a separate copy over here that I'm going to use as like a guide, and I'm going to go through my paper real quick and just tell you guys all about what I put in the book. So I started off with defining an ELL student, which is just an English language learner whose native language is not English. A term used before used to be ESL student, as English as a second language, but English could be the student's third, fourth, fifth, sixth language, so they stick with ELL now, so they're just English language learners. The next part of the paper talks about what makes teaching an English language learner different or more difficult than teaching a native English speaker how to write. And I did some research, and I came across research done by Dr. Show Mi Lin of Tennessee University, and she found 14 major points of writing instruction and writing techniques that ELL students tend to struggle with. She did a survey of adult ELL students, and they told her all of the things that they struggled with the most, and she ranked them from most difficult for them to least difficult for them. And to go through them, like the first one is word choice. So when they're trying to decide what word in English to put down on the paper, they sometimes know the word that they want to put down in their native language, but then they look in like a bilingual dictionary or something like that, and there's multiple definitions, or the definitions are very vague, and they sometimes struggle with which words they want to put into their writing. The next one is American English thought patterns. So the way that we write as native English speakers, we have a specific style and a specific order that we write things in. And in their native language, for an ELL student, it might be a little bit different. So adapting and changing to the new thought pattern is something that they struggle with sometimes. That leads us to fluency of writing. So most of the time, ELL students are thinking in their native language, and then they translate what they want to write into English on paper. But it takes a lot of time and effort and energy when they're having these thoughts and having to translate them in their head before they put them on paper, which leads to shorter works and less fluent works, because most of the effort is into translating the words and not actually making everything flow, and they don't write as one smooth motion. It's a lot more work put into it. The fourth thing that English language learners struggle with the most is anxiety. So most English language learners have said that when they are writing in English, they're really anxious about the task, which makes them try to sit down and prepare and plan more. And on top of all that planning and preparing, they just kind of psych themselves out and get even more anxious about the piece of work that they're creating. Number 5 is idioms. So it's kind of difficult for someone whose native language is not English to be able to differentiate between literal language and figurative language and decide which type of idioms are professional or appropriate to use and which ones are just like slang terms or colloquial terms. And as a result, they typically don't use them in their writing to play it safe. And the next part is low self-confidence, which goes hand in hand with the anxiety. When they get so nervous about writing their works, and they start to feel like they're not good enough, that they're inferior to native English writers, and that they could never compare. And their low self-confidence and their increased anxiety leads to lack of creativity. They're not willing to take risks in their writing because they don't have the confidence to step out of their comfort zone. The 7th one is thesis statements. So typically ELL students struggle with summarizing their thoughts into one concise sentence. They can put the thoughts onto the paper easier than they can take all the thoughts that they have and break them or like condense them down into one short, concise sentence that says everything they want to say, because they're still kind of struggling with learning the English language as it is. And then number 8 is spelling. So English is very complex when it comes to spelling, and we've all kind of learned that by now, that a lot of our phonemes don't have one-to-one correspondence, and what you see is not always what you get, and the same thing goes with what you hear is not always what you actually get. So they'll try to sound out words when they're writing, and sometimes the spelling is still off because we have so many weird rules and exceptions that as native English speakers, we learn those from the beginning, and those are things that they have to get reaccustomed to because they don't have that kind of weird relationship to their language in their native language. Number 9 is conclusions. So that goes kind of the same with thesis statements, as they struggle to take all of the information that they've written and composed and then condense it down into like one final thought. The next is prepositions for number 10. So prepositions are tricky because they just get confused when they try to look them up. The definitions are just kind of broad, and it doesn't make it any easier for them to choose a preposition or, decide what best fits. So I guess that goes along with word choice, which is the first one, the most difficult for them. Number 11 is organization. So most ELL students are not used to having to follow strict guidelines like we do. We have beginning, middle, end. We have thesis statements. We have conclusions. We have specific ways that we organize our writing that we've always seen, when being exposed to books when we're younger. We've learned from the beginning. So ELL students struggle with understanding the organization pattern, and they benefit more from just free writing, being able to say whatever they want to say, however they say it. Number 12 is generating ideas. So non-native English speakers find it difficult to come up with unique ideas in English and put them down. Number 13 is paragraph conclusions, which goes back to like thesis statements and regular conclusions. It's kind of just hard to condense things down into a concise statement. And then number 14 is grammar and sentence fragments. So as ELL students are writing, they tend to translate their thoughts into English, and sometimes everything is not an exact translation. So that leads to choppier sentences, grammatical errors when writing the sentences, and which goes back to fluency. And those are the top 14 things that they struggle with. And I noticed when reading through this that the patterns that go along with it, anxiety and low self-esteem lead to less fluency. They lead to less risk-taking. The grammar comes along from prepositions and word choices. They're not sure which words to pick. And also that most ELL students are thinking in their native language when they are trying to write in English. So they are taking longer to write because they are translating in their heads. The next research I did after that was about what ELL students need to succeed. So the book that I read was Speaking and Writing for English Language Learners, Collaborative Teaching for Greater Success with K through 6. This is by a woman named Sasson, and the research in her book, I picked 3 main things that ELL students need to succeed in your classroom. So the first thing is exposure. They need to be exposed to texts, to books, to fiction and nonfiction. They need to be exposed to narratives, to poems, to all different types of literature. Things that you expect them to write, they need to see it, because they learn better from seeing the style and learning how to copy and organize the way that we do. So exposure is a very important thing for ELL learners. You can't just expect them to know how to write the way that we write if they've never experienced it before. The next is proper reading instruction, because interestingly, reading and writing instruction go together. If students know how to read, they can learn better how to write because they are familiar with the style. They've seen someone else do it, so now they can do it. And the next is meaning. It is so very important for ELL students to be able to associate what they're doing with meaning. They need to know why. They need to be able to see how they can take what they're learning here and put it out into the world. They need to be able to relate to it. A lot of ELL students write very well with personal narratives and things like that because they the work has meaning to them. So it's much easier for them to comprehend it and figure out how to organize it and things like that. So the next thing that I talked about is what we can do as educators to provide ELL students with the proper instruction that they need. So the first thing that I discussed is collaboration. Collaboration is so key. Sassen's book talks so much about how collaboration is important. In your general education classroom, you need to collaborate with an ESL specialist or someone like that, because this is instruction that we as native English speakers did not get that kind of intense training on how to work with these kinds of students. Sure, we hear about it every now and then and we get some ideas, but we were not trained. We haven't been through it. We did not get that intense training. These ESL teachers are teachers that know both languages. They understand the correspondences and how to work with these students to help them learn how to learn English. So in collaboration, I talked about co-teaching models. There's 6 co-teaching models. They are 1 teach, 1 assist, 1 teach, 1 observe, parallel teaching, alternative teaching, and team teaching. Throughout my paper, I talk about what these mean and how you can incorporate them with your ESL specialist in your classroom and how they benefit the students. After collaboration is writing review. One thing that we can do is have our ELL students write. Before we start a unit, before we start a lesson, before we get into narratives, before we get into expository text, we have the ELL student write that kind of paper, and we see, looking at what they have written, what they struggle with, what their strengths are, what needs do we need to cater to in this lesson, and that's how you differentiate your lesson plans based off the particular needs of your class, because not every class is the same, not every student is the same. The next thing talked about in my guidebook is scaffolding. We can scaffold English language learners to learn how to write by providing examples, giving them that exposure that they need, showing them how we do it, thinking out loud, walking them through it, doing it with them, and then letting them go on their own. For young ELL students, for ones that can't really write well, like kindergarten and first grade, you can provide them with word banks to help them with their word choice and things like that. The next thing that I wrote about was guided writing. So this is when a group of students write alongside a professional or alongside the teacher, so the teacher can sit there and help them. They can monitor their progress. They can see where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are, and what they need help with, and provide it right then. That's really good for the alternative collaboration method, which is where, the general education teacher will speak to the class, and then the alternative is the ESL specialist off to the side with a small group of students, giving them more intense help with the lesson that they're working on. The final thing that I said under what can we do is just provide meaningful instruction. Give the students something they can understand. Give the students something they can work with. Make it make sense to them. We're trying to help them, and the best way to help them is to use what they know to their advantage. And that's basically all the research that I did. The last few pages of my guidebook are just 3 lesson plans that I came up with on my own by taking what I researched, what students struggle with, and then looking at the Virginia SOLs. And I picked 3 SOLs, 3 different grade levels, and did a lesson that will work for the general education classroom and the ELL students within that class. So I'll just briefly go over my lessons and give you like a kind of example of what I thought would be a good way to teach them. So the first standard and objective that I picked was the student will write in a variety of forms, including narrative, descriptive, and opinion. So my lesson is on writing a personal narrative, and I chose to give the students an example. You start off by, I chose to first, explain what a personal narrative is and what it means. You then give an example. So I told a story about my 6th birthday, and you tell the story first, and then you write a chart out on the board that says beginning, middle, end, and then you have the students help you decide what belonged in the beginning, what belonged in the middle, and what belonged at the end. And then you explain to them that this is how you do your pre-writing. You just do it backwards. You start with your chart, think of your story, what happens in the beginning, what happens in the middle, and what happens at the end. Now, you can raise your hand once you're completed with your beginning, middle, end chart. And then once I have decided, or the ESL teacher in the room has decided that you are ready to move on, then you go ahead and you move on and you actually write your story using that structure. That gives students practice with pre-writing strategies, practice with structure and organization, and practice in writing personal narratives. The next lesson that I chose was a spelling lesson in the SOL objective. This is a second grade objective. It is the student will edit writing for capitalization, punctuation, spelling, and standard English. And I highlighted specifically 2.4H, which was use correct spelling for commonly used sight words, including compound words and regular plurals. So what I'm having the students do in this activity is to practice using their sight words and spelling them. So we're doing a station teaching kind of activity where at the first station is me or whoever the general education teacher is, and we're doing speedy spellers. I used, by the way, the second grade Dolch list. So some of the words on there are always, around, write, sing, use, very, watch, very short words. So I decided that we were going to use a tray, and you spray like some shaving cream in the tray, and the teacher will say the word to the student. So example, I would say sleep, and the students would spell the word out with their finger and the shaving cream, and the first one done gets a point. Just practice spelling your words, and then you can just wipe it out and start all over. For the second station, it would be popcorn spelling with the ESL specialist. So the teacher, the specialist, would give the word, and she would have a whiteboard. So say the word was always. The first student would say A, second L, third W, and they would spell it out, and the teacher would write it on the board. And if the student just gets the answer wrong, we'd say, try again. Let's sound it out. Let's see what goes in there. So just practice with your spelling. And then the third one would just be a buddy up independent group. So two students, one would have a word card and would read the word, and the second student would spell it out on a dry erase board. And then they would switch and take turns, which gives them multiple different types of exposure to the spelling techniques and a lot of practice, which is really good because one of the things that I said that ELL students struggled with a lot was spelling. The last lesson that I chose, and I'm going to go over real quick, was word choice in detail. So the SOL is a fourth grade SOL, and it says the student will write in a variety of forms to include narrative, descriptive, opinion, and expository. The main parts that I highlighted were engage in a writing as a process, elaborate writing by including details to support the purpose, and utilize elements of style, including word choice and sentence variation. So for this particular lesson, what I chose to do was an activity with descriptive word choice. So I chose to do alternative teaching for this method. So the general education teacher would be at the front teaching most of the class. ESL's teacher will be at the back with a small group of ELL learners to work on the same task, but more intense. What we have is the teacher will go over with the students, will have them write a word bank of descriptive words that they generate on their own, or the teacher can provide some scaffolding, which is when it is necessary, and then we'll practice editing sentences. So for the first sentence that I used as an example to go over with the class was the cat purred. And then the edited example would be the soft white cat purred quietly. And then we would, show which words were inserted in there, which words were descriptive words, and we would practice that a couple times, and then they would buddy up and they would receive one paper that is a paragraph that lacks descriptive words. And in that paragraph, they would have to go through and find out where all the descriptive words could be inserted and make it better, and then they would come to the front of the class and share their new story. For my ELL intensive group, I figured that the ESL specialist could work with them, point out, they could go through as a group and highlight all the areas that lacked detail and needed detail as a scaffolding measure to say, here is where we need to put our words. Here's where we need to put our words. And the students will be encouraged to use the word bank they previously created to help decide which words they wanted to put into the sentence, and then they could also share their story with the group. This lesson purpose was word choice, because these students needed to practice which words they liked. And if you remember at the beginning, we talked about word choice was the number one thing that ELL students said they struggled with. So I decided that we really needed to hone in on that and focus on word choice. And for this lesson, it's just descriptive word choice. And finally, I just closed it out saying I really hope that this book can help you all. Obviously, I didn't give you every lesson plan idea ever. I just came up with 3 short ideas that I hope you can use as just launch pads to take your lessons into the next level. Come up with your own ideas. Like, I'm curious to see what you guys would do to differentiate your lessons. And then all my sources are cited at the end for you guys to see. I really appreciate you all taking time out of your day to sit down and listen to me talk about my book. I really hope you found it as interesting as I did. It was actually very beneficial for me to do this research because I got so many ideas for my own future classroom, and I hope that you can take my ideas. Please do take my ideas and use them in your future classroom and make sure that all of your students are receiving the instruction that they need and your ELL students are benefiting from your instruction. Have a great rest of your day, guys, and enjoy your summer.